The world was silent at dawn, the kind of silence that listens to pain. A mother's cry rose from the riverbank, raw as thunder tearing through prayer. A young monk, Ananda, watched her crumble beneath the weight of her child's still body. And when he turned to his master, the Buddha, he saw him smiling. Not in cruelty, not in distance, but with a calm that defied the world. And how can he smile, Ananda thought, when the earth itself weeps? The Buddha's eyes met his, deep as the ocean, empty as the sky. And Ananda felt both peace and terror. Was compassion meant to look like this? Was enlightenment the end of feeling or the beginning of understanding? He bowed in confusion as the mother screamed at the heavens, and in that scream began a question that would echo through time. Why does the Buddha smile at suffering? Ananda walked beside the river long after the mother's cries had faded. The morning sun turned the Ganges into a sheet of gold, yet all he saw was suffering reflected in it. If compassion is to feel another's pain, he whispered, why did the Blessed One not weep? Each step felt heavier than the last. He remembered the Buddha's silence, not cold, but unreachable, like a mountain that does not answer thunder. He wanted to understand, yet his heart trembled. Was it possible that love could exist without tears? That evening, Ananda returned to the monastery. The Buddha sat surrounded by disciples, teaching through silence. No words, just a single lotus floating in a bowl of water beside him. The young monks watched, puzzled, but the Buddha's smile remained unchanged, soft as moonlight. To them, it was peace. To Ananda, it was a riddle that burned. Master, he finally asked, is not suffering real? The Buddha looked at him and placed a finger upon his own heart. Then he whispered, what is real, Ananda? If even the heart is a dream. Night fell heavy, and Ananda could not sleep. The cries of the mother still echoed within him, mingling with the Buddha's gentle voice. He stepped outside his hut. Fireflies drifted like moving stars. If suffering is illusion, he thought, why does it feel so real? In the distance, the Buddha still sat beneath the tree, unmoving, timeless. Ananda bowed from afar, tears glimmering in his eyes. For the first time, he realized the question he feared was not about suffering. It was about himself. Before dawn, the Buddha rose and began to walk toward the village. Ananda followed silently, still burdened by his question. They passed burnt fields and broken huts, signs of life's impermanence etched in every corner. A dying man lay by the roadside, whispering for water. The Buddha knelt, lifted his head gently, and offered him a few drops from his bowl. The man smiled faintly and died in peace. Ananda trembled. The Buddha's hand lingered on the man's chest for a moment, then withdrew with that same quiet smile. In that moment, Ananda felt the question pierce his heart once more. Did the Buddha end suffering, or did he simply see through it? That night, as Ananda meditated beside the dying embers, his breath carried him backward, through time, into the memories of his master. He saw the young Prince Siddhartha, standing beyond the palace walls for the first time, face to face with sickness, age, and death. The sight burned him like fire, not for what he saw, but for what he had never seen before. The perfect life he once knew cracked open, and from the crack, compassion began to rise like light through smoke. That night, the prince sat alone in his chamber. The palace music echoed faintly, but in his heart, there was only silence. The jeweled walls that once sparkled with joy now felt like cages of gold. Yasodhara slept beside their infant son, her hand resting gently upon the child's chest. Siddhartha watched them, love tearing at him, not for what he could hold, but for what he must let go. How can I keep happiness? He whispered. When the world is drowning in sorrow. The question burned until dawn. Before sunrise, Siddhartha stood at the edge of the forest, dressed in the robes of a wanderer. He looked back one last time toward the sleeping city, its towers fading in the mist. The sound of distant drums faded with his past. He stepped barefoot onto the earth, and for the first time felt its cold truth. The prince died that morning, and in his place a seeker was born. Years passed beneath harsh suns and moonless nights. The seeker starved, meditated, and fought his own mind in silence. His ribs became a map of determination. His breath slowed until even the wind seemed still, yet peace did not come. One night, weak and trembling beside the river Naranjara, he realized suffering could not be destroyed by fighting it. To resist pain was still to be bound by it. Only by understanding it could one be free. Then, as dawn broke, a young girl named Sujata appeared, carrying a bowl of rice milk. She knelt and offered it to the starving monk. His hands shook as he accepted, not from hunger, but from understanding. He smiled for the first time in years. The middle path revealed itself in that simple act of kindness. The fire of his struggle cooled into compassion, and within that moment of nourishment he began to awaken. Days later, the Buddha sent Ananda to the nearby village to beg for alms. The riverbank was quiet, but grief still lived there. He found the same mother, Mira, kneeling beside a small mound of earth. Her face was cracked with exhaustion, her eyes hollow but fierce. When she saw the monk's bowl, rage flashed through her sorrow. "Where was your Buddha when my child died?" she cried. Ananda froze. The question pierced him deeper than any blade. In that moment, the river wind carried her pain into him, and he realized compassion is not gentle. It burns. Mira's anger spilled like rain. She spat upon the ground and pointed at the sky. "You monks speak of peace while my heart is ash," she screamed. The villagers watched from afar, silent as stones. Ananda wanted to speak, to defend his master. But the Buddha's words echoed within. "See suffering, do not fight it." So he bowed and said nothing. The silence disarmed her. Her rage broke into sobs. In her tears he saw a mirror, his own fear reflected perfectly. As the storm clouds gathered, a wandering figure approached, a ragged man laughing softly to himself. His robes were torn, his eyes bright with madness or wisdom. "Even gods," he said, "bleed from the heart when they love the world." Mira turned away, but Ananda stared at him, struck by the strange peace in his brokenness. "Who are you?" he asked. The man only smiled. "A mirror," he said. "Nothing more." Then he walked toward the woods, laughter echoing like thunder in the rain. That night, Ananda dreamt of the stranger's voice. In his dream, the Buddha and Mira stood on opposite sides of a river. The Buddha smiled. Mira wept. Between them, Ananda tried to build a bridge of words, but every plank dissolved into water. Then he heard the voice whisper, "Words cannot cross the river. Only understanding can." When he awoke, the night was silent, and the sound of flowing water filled his mind like a mantra. At dawn, Ananda returned to the Buddha and fell to his knees. "Master," he said, "I saw her pain, and it became mine. Yet still, I do not understand your smile." The Buddha looked toward the rising sun. "Ananda," he said softly, "when you suffer with another, that is love. When you understand that the suffering and the one who suffers are not separate, that is awakening." Ananda bowed his head, tears falling freely, no longer from confusion but from the birth of compassion. Morning sunlight poured gently through the monastery courtyard. The monks prepared for their daily alms, washing bowls, folding robes. Laughter echoed softly, the sound of simple life. Then a young novice, trembling with haste, slipped. The Buddha's alms bowl shattered against the stone floor. The courtyard fell silent. Every breath stopped. Ananda waited for anger, for sorrow. But the Buddha only smiled, lifted a shard, and said, "All things are already broken, my child." We simply forget. The sound of that calm voice felt heavier than thunder. The novice began to weep, begging forgiveness. The Buddha bent down and gathered the shards, placing them gently in the boy's hands. "See how easily the bowl returns to the earth," he said. "So too will we." Ananda felt the words settle deep within him like seeds in fertile soil. For the first time, he saw how the Buddha's smile was not denial. It was reverence for everything that must one day end. Later that day, as Ananda cleaned the courtyard, he held one of the broken pieces in his hand. He turned it over slowly, feeling its rough edge. The fragment reflected the sky, cracked but still beautiful. He realized then that peace was not to fix what breaks. It was to see beauty in the breaking itself. The bowl was no longer a loss, but a teacher. At dusk, a storm gathered over the monastery. The wind howled through bamboo groves, scattering leaves across the floor. The monks rushed to shelter, but the Buddha remained seated beneath the bodhi tree. Ananda ran to him, shouting above the wind, "Master, the storm is coming." The Buddha's eyes remained closed. "Let it," he said. "The storm cleanses what clings." And in that moment, lightning flashed across the sky, reflecting in the calm of his eyes. When the rain ceased, silence fell thicker than before. The courtyard glistened under moonlight, puddles reflecting stars. The broken bowl lay on the ground, half buried in mud. The Buddha rose, brushed water from his robe, and whispered, "Nothing is lost, Ananda. The bowl is still the bowl, only its form is changed." Ananda knelt beside the shards, and for the first time, he smiled too. The lesson had entered his heart. The monsoon arrived without warning. Dark clouds swallowed the sky, and thunder rolled like an ancient drum. Villagers ran for shelter as rain poured over roofs and fields. Ananda and the monks worked to protect the monastery, carrying scrolls and lamps inside. Then, a crack of lightning split the air, striking the bodhi tree. Flames danced among the branches. Ananda froze in terror, but the Buddha stood unmoving beneath the rain, his eyes closed, his face serene. "The tree burns," Ananda cried. "Yes," said the Buddha softly, "and so does ignorance." The fire spread quickly. Monks shouted, forming lines to fetch water. Amid the chaos, Ananda saw the Buddha walking slowly toward the burning branches, his bare feet splashing through puddles. "Master," Ananda called. "You'll be hurt." The Buddha only smiled. The rain thickened, drenching both flame and man. Slowly, the fire began to die. Steam rose in shimmering veils. The monks fell silent, watching the impossible stillness, a man untouched by fear in the heart of destruction. In the village below, Mira's home collapsed under the flood. She clutched her empty hands. Nothing left, not even tears. When she looked up, she saw the monastery on the hill, half hidden by smoke and rain. Something pulled her there. Barefoot and soaked, she climbed the muddy path, her body trembling, her heart numb. "Why do I still live?" she whispered. Perhaps a voice inside her said, "Because there is something left to understand." When Mira reached the monastery, she collapsed before the Buddha, drenched and shaking. "I've lost everything again," she said. The Buddha knelt beside her, cupped her hands, and whispered, "Then you have lost your chains." She stared into his eyes, calm, endless, and for the first time, her grief broke not into tears, but into silence. That silence felt like home. The storm raged outside, but within her, something had finally become still. By dawn, the rain had stopped. The bodhi tree stood blackened but alive, its roots steaming in the morning sun. The villagers gathered below, amazed. Mira stood beside Ananda, her face peaceful for the first time. The Buddha turned to them and said, "The storm breaks what must break, but it also reveals what cannot be broken." His smile returned. The same gentle curve that once seemed a mystery. Now, in the silence after the storm, it felt like the answer. The moon rose high above the monastery, casting long shadows over the Bodhi tree. Ananda sat alone beneath it, his hands resting on his knees, his breath slow and steady. The night was still, yet inside, his heart stirred with questions. For so long, he had believed the answer to suffering was in escaping it, in finding a way to end it. But as he looked up at the stars, he realized, what if the answer is not to escape it, but to understand it? The trees swayed, the winds whispered, and for the first time, Ananda felt a deep peace rising within him. As Ananda meditated, memories flooded his mind. The grief of Mira, the suffering of the dying man, the fire that consumed the Bodhi tree. Each moment had felt like an obstacle, a force to overcome. But now, they no longer felt like burdens. He breathed in the memory of each one, held it gently, and exhaled. Perhaps the Buddha did not smile in the face of suffering to escape it, he thought, but to embrace it with open hand. The pain he once feared no longer felt like an enemy. It was simply a part of life, like the wind, like the sky. Suddenly, Ananda opened his eyes. The sound of footsteps reached his ears. He turned to see the Buddha standing quietly beside him. "Master," Ananda whispered, "I have been trying to understand suffering for so long, but now I wonder, is it possible to accept it without trying to change it?" The Buddha smiled, his expression soft and full of knowing. Acceptance, Ananda, is not about surrendering to suffering. It is about seeing it as it truly is, part of the flow, neither good nor bad. It simply is. And in that seeing, peace arises. The night passed slowly, and with each breath, Ananda's mind grew quieter. In the stillness, he saw the truth of the Buddha's words. Peace was not found by conquering suffering, but by accepting it as a part of life's natural cycle. His thoughts became like leaves floating on the surface of a river, moving gently but not pulling him along. In this space, he felt a deep freedom. Not the freedom from pain, but the freedom to experience it without fear. At dawn, Ananda stood and looked up at the Bodhi tree, its branches swaying softly in the early light. The Buddha had taught him that all things are impermanent, that everything passes, including suffering. But as he stood there, he felt a deep connection to everything around him. The tree, the earth beneath his feet, the wind in the branches. It was all part of the same cycle, rising and falling, without judgment, without resistance. The smile he had once seen on the Buddha's face now appeared within him, a quiet recognition of the truth that had always been. Years passed, and the Buddha's teachings spread far and wide. Ananda, now a seasoned monk, stood at the foot of the Bodhi tree once more, remembering all that had been. The world had changed around him, but his heart remained still. And yet, despite the peace he had found, a part of him still feared the impermanence of life. He knew that one day the Buddha would leave this world, but that thought had always felt distant. Now, standing in the quiet morning light, Ananda felt it grow near. One morning, the Buddha grew ill. His body, which had once been so vibrant, now withered like a fading flower. Ananda stayed by his side, watching helplessly as the master slipped further away. The disciples gathered, their faces filled with sorrow, but the Buddha remained calm, his eyes still filled with the same deep serenity. "Do not mourn for me," he said softly, "for I am not this body. The truth I have shown you is not in my form, but in your hearts." As the Buddha's final moments approached, Ananda sat at his feet, unable to speak. The Buddha's breath slowed, and the room grew still. "Master," Ananda whispered, his voice trembling, I do not understand. How can I live without you? The Buddha's smile deepened as he opened his eyes one last time. Ananda, he said, you have never been without me. You have never been without yourself. You are the peace you seek, the wisdom you crave. The truth has always been inside you. With those final words, the Buddha's body took its last breath. The room fell into an eerie silence, but within it, Ananda felt a deep peace. Not the kind that came from the absence of suffering, but the peace of understanding that suffering and joy were part of the same breath. The Buddha's body was no longer present, but his smile, that same eternal, knowing smile, filled the room. It was as if the smile was the truth itself, alive in every corner, in every being. This is not the end, Ananda thought. It is the beginning. Years later, Ananda walked through the villages, carrying the teachings of the Buddha. He would often smile to himself, knowing that the smile he now carried was the same one the Buddha had carried. It was not a smile of happiness or sorrow, but a smile of deep understanding. The kind that arose from seeing the truth of life and death, joy and sorrow, not as opposites, but as one. The smile was the peace that had always existed, waiting to be recognized. This was the teaching. This was the truth.